Eat, sleep, box, repeat. Now back to At the Fights with Gerry Cooney and Randy Gordon. It's all you, commish.
Gabby. Very clever. She has some coming back music. Yeah, that was from, what was that from? That was from The Sopranos. Just keep that going a little bit longer. I love that. It gets us into the mood of this, because our next guest, and he's in studio with us, is the author of 13 nonfiction books. His name is Jeffrey Sussman, and he's also he's the head of a marketing firm, powerpublicity.com. He's been a fan since he's 12 years old. You can see some of his writing on boxing.com. He's got a book coming out now on boxing called Boxing and the Mob. It's going to be put out next month by Rowman in Littlefield. Jeffrey Sussman, welcome to the show. And how much research did you do on this book?
Many thanks for inviting me. I did a lot of research. It took me about 10 months of research.
About 10 months. That's all?
That's all.
That's it?
It took me 5 years to write my book. Listen, so what made you decide to do about the mob? I mean, I know back in the day it was crazy.
Right. I got to meet people. My father introduced me to a man when I was 12 was his uncle, who I'd never met before, who was a bootlegger. And he was also responsible. People thought he was responsible for the murder of Dutch Schultz. And he was indicted for that but never tried. And I met him.
Was that because of the mob? That he wasn't tried?
I don't know why it wasn't. I know why they suspected him, because he was a competitor of Dutch Schultz. He operated in Harlem, where Dutch Schultz operated, and had a warehouse on 125th Street.
Makes sense.
And then when I was a kid, when I was also around 12 years old, I used to work for my father on Saturday mornings. He had a dress manufacturing company. And my job, in addition to sweeping up the floors, was carrying bolts of cloth up from the basement to a cutting table. And I was coming up the stairs one day, and as I'm carrying this 50-pound bolt of cloth on my shoulder, I hear my father and another man screaming and yelling at each other. I didn't say anything, but when I got in the car driving home that afternoon, I asked my father what that was about. He said that was a gangster named Johnny Dio who wanted to unionize my father's workers, and they had voted against being unionized because they would have gotten less pay, and he also wanted him to hire his trucking company, which eventually had to do. And my mother had a cousin who was in the mob, and he was a very likable, charming man, and I found that fascinating. And ultimately, in the early 1980s, I was recently divorced, and I was sort of at wit's end. I didn't know exactly what I would be doing. And I had a friend for a number of years. I won't mention his last name. His first name was Tom. And his father, I subsequently learned, handled gambling in New York for Frank Costello. And Frank Costello was this man's godfather. And Tom helped me to get on my feet again and helped me to get clients for my PR marketing business. And when I learned his stories about the mob and so forth, it just added to my fascination with it.
So exciting.
And the bootlegger who was friends with my father told me that during the Depression in the 1930s, my father's family was very poor. And this man wouldn't give financial aid, but he told my father which boxing matches to bet on that were fixed. And there were primarily bouts that Primo Carnero was involved in, most of which were fixed. And so, he would say to my father, bet $75 and you'll walk away with $750 or $1,000. And he would do that 3 or 4 times a year. And these were other stories that fascinated me about the mob and boxing.
Can I just tell you something? From that first story, I cannot wait to read your book.
Oh,
The characters, the people, the stories, the flavors, the family, how it all took place. It's just amazing because that's the fight world, really. Aside from the mafia and the those kind of boxing is that way. You fall this way, you talk to that guy, this gets fixed up. You know what I mean? It's such a beautiful. It just makes me want to smile. You know what I mean?
Well, when I was 12, I was a short, skinny kid, and my father was worried that bigger kids would pick on me. And my father was a very tough guy. He had been an amateur boxer when he was young. So one day he brought home a pair of boxing gloves, a speed bag, a heavy bag, and a jump rope, and he gave me lessons in the basement of our house. But he also was very friendly with Lou Stillman, who had Stillman's gym.
Sure.
And he arranged for a middleweight there to give me 10 boxing lessons for $100. and at the end of this...
What year was that?
1956.
Wow, I was born that year.
Oh, yeah? I was born in 1943. So at the end of the 10 lessons, I said to this, he was a middleweight, I said, I'd love to get into the ring and spar with someone. He said, what, are you crazy? You'll get your head knocked in. But I did walk away with a Stillman's T-shirt that I wore religiously until it wore out.
And that hurt your feelings when he told you that, right?
It did, yeah, because taking all those boxing lessons went to my head. I thought, I was a tough guy.
That happens
and I
a lot.
wasn't.
And your father yelling at that guy in that room was because he was a fighter.
He was. He really was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're talking to Jeffrey Sussman, who's got a book coming out by Rowman and Littlefield, The Mob and Boxing. And there are a couple names that Gerry and I, when we knew you were coming in, and we really wanted to have you come in because of this book, because it doesn't seem like we can get through very many weeks in a row where there's not some controversial call, where you watch the fight and you say, okay, fighter A won it. And then you hear the decision being rendered and fighter B wins it. And you're sitting there, you're breaking your TV. I don't know how many televisions Gerry has broken, and I've broken plenty.
Sure.
You throw things at it, and you have to get a new TV. Well, we get fed up with these judges, and I've always said it's either incompetence or it's dishonesty. Which is it?
I think it's dishonesty. In the mid-1980s, I was promoting a welterweight boxer named Howard Davis, who had won.
You were doing what?
Wait a minute.
I was doing the publicity for
okay.
Howard
So you're
Davis.
saying you're promoting it.
Well, no, I didn't mean promoting like a boxing promoter. I meant I was doing the publicity for it. And
he was like a brother to both of us.
Oh, he was a stablemate of mine.
wonderful.
He was a stablemate
I
of
loved
mine.
him.
He was a
I used to
stable-
go to the Times Square gym, which was on West 42nd Street, and watch him train. But I was talking to someone. It wasn't his manager. It was somebody else. And we were talking about fixed fights. And he said, all you have to do is just fix one judge. And if it's going to be a decision and not a knockout.
See, here's the thing. I ran the New York
was a
State
boxing
Athletic
commissioner,
Commission for 7 years. But it was in a different era. It was from 88 until 95. And I must tell you, I was all over these judges. I knew everything they were doing. I never saw anything in there, and I used to go to every fight in Jersey, and I used to go to every big fight in Nevada, and I never saw anything during those years. But let's back up, because I think there's been too much scrutiny. So the mob, they want to do things very quietly.
Sure.
Let's go back. You mentioned Max Baer.
Can I just say one thing, Randy, before you do that? You're going to go right to Max Baer. Howard Davis was a great, skilled athlete, fighter.
Oh, he was
The
amazing.
only problem he had is he couldn't break an egg, and that's what hurt him in his career.
Well, he told me he told me he just didn't like the idea of getting punched, and he didn't like the idea of knocking somebody else out. He said to him there was nothing scarier than losing consciousness and lying on the canvas and not knowing where you were and what was happening.
He was a great fighter, though.
He was a
I'm
great
sorry,
fighter.
Randy, go on. We talk about Max Baer.
Yeah, you know what? It doesn't
No,
matter.
let's go back. Come on, Max
no,
Baer.
It's like a colonoscopy. You're out. You don't know it. And then you wake up. You have no idea. You have no idea. So anyway.
Colonoscopy, when you wake up, you think, wow, that was easy.
That was simple. That was no big
Yeah,
deal.
you don't wake up with a broken jaw or a broken nose.
Okay, let's go back to those days, like the late 20s, 30s, the Max Baers, the Jack Sharkeys, guys like that, Primo Carnera. The mob was pretty heavily involved in, right?
Yes, Primo Carnera was owned by a mobster named Oni Madden, who before he got involved in boxing was known as Oni the Killer Madden for the people he had
Right,
murdered.
and you've got a chapter on him.
I do.
It's a great
Wow.
chapter.
And
Where did I get your book?
Excuse me?
I want your book now. Where do I get your book?
Go to Amazon.com or
Great.
BarnesandNoble.com, and they'll get it for you. But after Prohibition ended, Oni was looking for other ways to make money, and he decided boxing was the ticket. And Primo Carnera had been a strong man in Italy. He had a French manager who brought him over here, and he looked like a boxer. He looked big and strong and tough, but he couldn't box. And Oni managed to fix every single fight that he had until Max Baer knocked him out. And then Max Baer became the world champion. That was in 1935. But the mob came into Max Baer's dressing room and wanted him to lose. Max Baer had a very tough manager named Ansel Hoffman, who told the mob guys to take a hike. Wow. And for some reason they did. And it turns out that Oni Madden and his cohorts all bet on Max Baer that night, and supposedly won over $1 million on that fight.
Tell us about Abe Attell. Here's a guy, arguably, World War I into the 20s and everything. What are you great fighters? He had a lot to do with fixing the 1919 World Series?
Yeah, he was a bagman for Arnold Rothstein in fixing the 1919 World Series. And after that was over, and there were trials and the Black Sox scandal, Abe and Attell realized that it would be a lot easier to fix a boxing match than to fix a baseball game. You only had to fix one player, not 9 players. And Abe went on to do a lot of fixing. He was actually at one point hired by Oni Madden to train Primo Carnera to make him look like a fighter in the ring, so that at least people wouldn't think that it was all fixed.
Listen, I remember those movies where he traveled on a bus and Primo Carnera and all that was going on. Jake LaMotta, do you have anything in your book about Jake LaMotta?
Yeah, that's one of the two guys we were going to ask you about. Here we go, because until he passed away recently, every year Jake would go up with Gerry and myself to the International Boxing Hall of Fame. And Gerry was more or less his unofficial, unofficial babysitter.
No, stop it. Stop. That's disrespectful. Listen, Jake LaMotta was a little bit older.
I'm not going to give Jake LaMotta the respect that a lot of people do. He doesn't deserve it.
But listen to me. I love the guy, and I understand he wasn't the greatest of guys. He had a mental problem.
Hallelujah.
He was a mental problem. He had some mental problems. But he fought his ass off, and he bucked the system with the mob, and he went ahead and fought and won the championship. So, look, listen, come on, let's be straight. Was he wrapped too tight? No. Did he make a lot of mistakes? Yes. Was he messed up? We all a little messed up, weren't we?
Rocky Graziano and Jake LaMotta were in a reform school together, and they became good friends. They remained friends for the rest of their lives. But when they were in reform school, Rocky said to Jake, he said, you must learn how to control your anger. He said, you're never going to be a successful boxer until you get control of your anger. And of course, he never did, and Rocky didn't either. So it was funny advice coming from Rocky, who was a very angry person too.
Jake LaMotta told me that he and Rocky were supposed to fight, and Rocky wouldn't fight him.
I heard that story too. I don't know if it was true. I was talking to Rocky Graziano's daughter, Roxy, 2 weeks ago, and she told me that Rocky loved Jake. They were just the best of friends, but Rocky's wife couldn't stand him. And I was talking to a mobster last week who knew them, and he said to me, Jake was a scumbag. And I said, why? And he said, the day after Rocky died, Jake tried to date Rocky Graziano's wife.
No, I don't believe that.
I don't believe it either.
I totally believe it. This is Jake LaMotta we're talking about.
Listen, someone told me, I told him I love the guy, I think he's great. I said, what do you like about him most? That he beats women up? No, but he picked women who were actually, would flirt on him, would flirt with other men. And, there's people, you do that. Right. And you learn about that, and you stop attracting those kind of women. He never could get that out of his system. To the day he died, he had a woman, was the same kind of girl. She was flirtatious with other men, and Jake was jealous as hell when he was 95 or whatever he was. It was a sad story, and he loved her so much.
And Jeffrey Sussman, who just wrote the book, it's coming out in just a few more weeks. Rowman and Littlefield put it out, Boxing and the Mob, The Notorious History of the Sweet Science. I got one more name to throw at you because we could spend another hour or two just on Jake LaMotta.
Sure.
There's another name, Sonny Liston. Were the two fights against Muhammad Ali, one against Cassius Clay, on the up and up?
I don't think so.
Either one.
No, I don't think so.
You're never going to know. What are you gonna...
Well,
No, I'm
there's
asking
a certain amount of evidence. After the first fight, when he said he couldn't move his arm, that it was so injured, it was examined by a doctor afterwards, and it said that he had hurt his arm so much,
His left shoulder.
yeah, that it had bled into the muscles, and he couldn't move it. He just couldn't lift it. Now the second fight, there were.
Then it was on the up and up, the first one. That it was honest. There was no dive.
I think Sonny took a dive. I don't think Muhammad Ali had any idea that he was taking a dive.
Well, the second fight.
I don't think Muhammad Ali knew it then either, but he was also taking a dive because, there are three pieces of evidence.
Reason.
One, a mobster from the Midwest named John Vitale told a friend that the Lewiston fight would be over in the first round and don't bother going. A gambler in Las Vegas named Ash Resnick had a friend who was going to fly up to Lewiston to see the fight, and he said, don't bother going, it'll be over before you get there. And Sonny Liston's wife said, I said to Sonny before the fight, just lay down after the first round. Why get hit? Why get hurt? If you're going to lose the fight anyway, it doesn't make any sense.
Was there any truth to the rumor that the Muslims had kidnapped the family of Sonny Liston and said, if you don't go down, we're going to hurt them?
I heard that, but I couldn't find any evidence that was true. But, Muhammad Ali said two things that were very interesting. After Sonny Liston fell down in the ring, Muhammad Ali said, get up, sucker. No one's going to believe I knocked you out. And when Muhammad Ali went back to his corner, he said to his cornerman, did I hit him? Did I hit him? He didn't even believe he hit him.
And Angelo said, yes, you did. You hit him with a good shot. And that's when they came up with the step and fetch it and everything.
Right.
And again, we're talking to Jeffrey Sussman, who's got this incredible book out. And we're talking about boxing and the mob, the notorious history of the sweet science. Right now, we're talking about the Muhammad Ali two fights against Sonny Liston, Charles Sonny Liston. You mentioned a name, Ash Resnick, who was as powerful can be. I have heard talk that it was Ash Resnick who gave the order to have Sonny Liston killed. Did you ever hear about that?
I heard rumors about it, but there was no way I could prove it. I know that it was also said in Las Vegas circles that Ash Resnick and Sonny Liston both bet on Muhammad Ali to win that fight in Lewiston, and supposedly Ash Resnick won over $1 million.
Thank you for putting my mind at rest more about that whole situation. There was another story I heard about was that Sonny Liston hated needles.
He did.
And there was a needle in his back.
Right.
Stuck. You heard about that?
Yes.
Yeah, because when you hear that it was a drug overdose, you say, wait a minute, a needle in the back from a guy who hated needles.
Wow,
Terrified of needles.
Can't wait to read your book. I want to ask you a question then. And you're still a fight fan?
Absolutely.
You still follow the game?
Not as much as I used to, but I still do.
Well, boxing kind of died off for a while.
Right.
Now it's so big and strong. So many great fights in the heavyweights, the light heavyweights, cruiserweights, welterweights, middleweights. It's just crazy.
It really is.
Any big changes?
Yeah, there are too many divisions.
Not that many people can...
And too many sanctioning bodies.
Sanctioning bodies.
And listen,
I can't stand all those sanctioning bodies.
Not that many people getting killed anymore, right?
Max Baer killed the first guy he fought on the West Coast. Felt terrible about it.
He felt terrible about it? I don't think so. He was an angry guy, wasn't he?
No, he was a lovely human being. A lot of people don't realize it. When he beat Primo Carnera, he broke Primo Carnera's jaw. He broke a bone in his arm. He broke 3 ribs, and the mob dropped Primo. They just dumped him. Max Baer went and paid all of Primo Carnera's hospital bills.
Because I heard he was a really vicious guy, a mean guy, not very friendly. Wasn't true?
No. He was very, very friendly,
most
very
fighters are all
charming.
good. Yeah, no.
The movie Cinderella Man was totally wrong about Max Baer. Completely got him
Yes.
wrong. I spent hours interviewing Max's son, Max Baer Jr. He told me a very cute story. If we have time, I just want to tell it to you. Max Baer Jr. wanted to be a fighter. His father didn't want him to be a fighter. He said, this is not for you. But Max Baer Jr. said, well, can you just teach me the elements of fighting? And his father said, okay, we're going to go into the backyard. We're going to put on big, heavy, puffy gloves, and we're not going to hurt each other. But don't hit me in the face. I warn you, don't hit me in the face. And I'll teach you how to jab, how to slip a punch, how to throw a right cross. And Max Baer Jr. was very excited by this. And he got more and more into it. And he threw as hard a punch as he could at his father's face. And he saw his father's eyes change color. And the next thing he knew, he was lying on his back on the grass, and he's looking up at the sky.
Wow.
And his mother is looking out at the second-story bedroom window, and she's yelling at Max Baer Sr., "What did you do? What did you do? You killed our son. You killed our son. How could you do that?"
Right. You know, that's a great story, because I had my son out in the front yard with me one day, and I told him, looked him in the eyes, I said, listen, this is serious now. Pay attention.
Right.
So he took it as that he really had a fight. And he came on me, and I tapped him around a bit too. Anyway, listen, love your book. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you on with us tonight.
We want to
My
thank
pleasure.
Jeffrey Sussman for being in studio with us today, Lou DiBella for joining us, John McGinnis also. We'll be back on Friday night at the fights with you guys. MMA Junkie coming up next. Thank you to Jolt and Josh and the whole crew.
We're out of here.